Hey, what's up everybody? It's Dansu here with more Stormbound. Hope everybody's having a good time climbing the ladder right after the reset. I've actually been recording every single one of my games, so by the time I've hit rank 1, I'll have quite the collection. So, while climbing the ladder, I actually ran into this player named Oliver, who has a 20 HP base and is actually quite the good player. So he already hit rank 1, and while I was climbing up, I ran into him 3 times, and every single time he was testing out one of his dragon decks. In my last dragon deck analysis video, I came out with the ranking for each of the new dragons, and I received quite a lot of flack for underestimating the potential of some of the dragons. So in these 3 games, I just want to talk about what dragons actually do work and what dragons don't. And once again, I'm going to point out why you guys shouldn't be investing your resources into upgrading the dragons just yet, because it's very clear to me that a dragon deck is not viable at high levels. In the low level games, dragons do get a little bit stronger, and so those of you who are around rank 20 to rank 30 will probably have more success with dragons, but as you'll see today, they really can't compete with a solid constructed deck. Alright, so the first game that Oliver played me with was this winter deck. Through watching the video, I was able to collect his whole deck list, so if you guys do want to test it out, it's right here. So a couple things off the bat. Right now, the number of dragons is so limited that if you do want to play a dragon deck, you're pretty much forced into playing all of the dragons. So you'll see over here, Oliver included every single dragon that Winter can play. And then from there on out, his deck building was very limited because if you want to play Savannah, you're forced to play all the freeze cards. So he's playing Frost Hexers and he's playing Midwinter Chaos. And he's also playing Moment's Peace, which I think is a bit of a mistake, but that's something else to go with. And then along with that, Savannah also forces you to play Gift of the Wise just because you have to have high mana to pump out her combo early on. And then from there on out, he chooses to play Lady Rhyme as his choice of a finisher, which I also disagree with, but she can be viable. And then that pretty much closes out his whole deck. So by putting all the dragons in, the rest of your cards are pretty much filled in. So I'll point out a couple of immediate problems with this deck that are dragon related, not player choice related, which is, first of all, the high mana dragons aren't that good, and what I'm talking about is Ludic Matriarchs and Dangerous Suitors. The reason why is because neither of these two individually do anything good on their own, and so when you do play them, you're pretty much forced to play both of them because they have really good synergy, and that results in not having a very stable lower mana card base. So you'll see that Oliver is lacking Gifted Recruits, First Mutineer, and he's lacking another 1-drop, which is a huge problem for him. I'm not playing a rush deck in particular, but if I am and he low rolls and doesn't get Gift of the Wise on his 5-mana turn, he's going to be put in a very tight situation. Let's get to the games. You guys will see what I mean. So I'm not going to talk a lot about my own gameplay here. It's pretty standard and you can find my strategies in my other videos. I want to focus on the pros and the cons of each dragon that he plays. So right off the bat, we get a turn 1 Spare Dragonlings, which is probably the weakest 2-drop that you can play without anything to back it up. And when you play Spare Dragonlings turn 1, there's no way to guarantee that it survives to turn 2. As you can see, even if I didn't have First Mutineer, playing any 1 movement card to put right in front of Spare Dragonlings would be able to kill it. Oliver is smart enough to know, though, that holding on to your cards in your hand would be an even worse idea, because that means that, first of all, you don't get a cycle into your next couple cards, and second of all, getting at least 1 point of value on the board is better than no value. So very lucky for him here, he actually gets his Gift of the Wise into Midwinter Chaos and Savannah combo, which is a really strong move, and you'll notice over here that it's pretty intimidating. Like, he gets a full board wipe off of it. But the thing to note here is that even though he manages to get off this insane combo, it takes up all 4 cards in his hand. So what that means is that after playing Gift of the Wise, Midwinter Chaos, and then Savannah, whatever card remaining in his hand is the card that he's forced to play. So if he really high rolls, like if he plays his Ludic Matriarch over here, that would be really good. But it's also possible that he would low roll again here. Say if the last card was a Frost Hexers or even a Conflicted Drakes, then that extra mana isn't actually going to be that useful. So he kind of lucked out in between here with a Dangerous Suitors. At level 3 isn't that strong, but it's a decent play. It definitely gave him the board advantage. So he manages to land the Ludic Matriarchs over here, which is pretty strong. And this is pretty much the best situation that Ludic Matriarchs can be in. The only other situation is if you're racing their base and you can use Ludic Matriarchs to flood their baseline. But this use over here is already pretty good. So over here, I actually kept in mind that a Broken Earth Drakes could blow me out, and if I was a little smarter, I may have tried to play around it, but I wasn't counting on it actually happening. So over here, he manages to land a second dragon in one of the perfect situations that it could be in, where he has only dragons on the field, and I have only non-dragons on the field, and his Broken Earth Dragons is high level enough to wipe out the whole board. You'll notice that even after landing both of his combos, Oliver is still fighting really hard for his board position. After his Broken Earth Drakes, he only had a 5 strength advantage over me at the end of the turn, and that's the opening of my 7 mana turn. So over here, you'll see that when I end my turn, his 5 strength advantage over me has turned into a 16 strength advantage of me over him. So that kind of shows the power of consistently valued cards over high rolling cards. The cards that he played that actually did roll high are struggling to carry the cards that rolled low. While since every one of my cards has been giving me a good amount of value, even if I have a bad hand, I'm still performing okay on the board. So over here, he actually had Midwinter Chaos, but he had nothing to capitalize off of it. Now, obviously, if he had a Savannah, and especially if he had a level 5 Savannah, this would be an absolute blowout on his end. But the fact of the matter is, you can't get lucky every single time. He already got off a Midwinter Chaos to Savannah combo on his 5 mana turn. The odds that he can consistently get it every single time he draws one of the cards is pretty low. So these kind of situations pop up a lot when you're playing dragons, and it's not just this Midwinter Chaos to Savannah combo. You'll see it with, for example, Spare Dragonlings and Wandering Worms. You're not always going to get both of them at the same time. And so even though, sure, the memorable situations with dragons are when you roll really high with it, the majority of the time, it's situations like this that happens. So in comparison, this 8 mana turn for me was probably one of the lowest rolls that I could get, where I had no synergistic cards, and my Victors of the Melee managed to hit only 1 unit. And still, at the end of my turn, I have a very commanding lead. The amount of strength that I played for was the exact same amount as the strength that Oliver played for on his turn. So a pretty nice turn by Oliver. He manages to get off a Savannah combo again this time, but here is where Ludic Matriarchs shows that she's also very situational. Over here, he only really played Ludic Matriarchs for 8 strength, which is pretty sub-average. His Frost Hexers to Savannah combo is, once again, pretty strong, but it doesn't compensate for the fact that he's playing weak cards on top of that. So that was actually a pretty cool play over there that is a little unrelated to dragons, but props to Oliver for actually getting Moment's Peace to work. So you guys can't see it over here because he's not going to play it, but his one source of AoE damage is Broken Earth Drakes, and you'll see that Broken Earth Drakes is actually very bad against base pressure. Like over here, he's going to have to count on having a mobile unit along with playing Broken Earth Drakes, and so instead of being able to pop off Broken Earth Drakes, he has to first play a unit to move up and then sacrifice Broken Earth Drakes into the Pirates. That doesn't actually make it bad. I still think it's one of the best dragons out there, but in this situation, it's not going to help him out. So this turn is pretty much just a disaster. You'll see that neither of the 2 dragons that he plays are anywhere close to above average. In fact, they barely break even with the amount of mana that Oliver is spending on it. And it's because, once again, dragons are just too situational. They're not going to work in the correct situation all the time. And when they don't work, they're insanely bad. Over here, you'll also notice that because he's forced to play so many high mana dragons, Oliver doesn't get to play the low mana units that are able to defend his base. If he had Gifted Recruits, if he had Rhymelings, if he had First Mutineer in his hand, then he'd be able to kill these units near his base. But instead, he's forced to play these dragons that don't even deal as much damage as these low mana units. Alright, so that's the first game that I want to show you guys. And obviously, there's two huge flaws in this dragon deck that doesn't say anything about dragons. One is that Oliver's dragons are mostly all level 3, so they have a hard time competing with my level 4 and level 5 cards. And two is that he just doesn't run Ubis the Hunter, and that's a terrible decision to make for any deck. There's obviously a lot of room to improve it, and I'm not saying that the deck overall is a terrible deck. I've lost games to, for example, Satyr buff strategies or even Ironclad structure strategies. So this deck is in no way not viable. I just think that it's pretty inconsistent, so that most of your games are either going to involve you getting incredibly lucky and closing out the game very fast, or for your luck to average out in the long run like it did over here and for you to just lose the game. Okay, let's take a look at the second game where Oliver plays a Shadowfen dragon deck. So this is the deck list that Oliver was using. A couple notes here. I only actually saw 11 cards out of 12 in his deck, but I'm guessing that the last card is Ludic Matriarchs, because he never played it, because it's really hard to find a good situation to play her. And if it was a lower mana card, then we probably would have seen it at least once. And the last card over here you'll notice is Broodmother Cordia, which I don't actually own, so I just put in another card for you guys to see. But the last card that he used was a level 3 Broodmother Cordia. So a couple notes about this deck. I think Oliver got quite a bit smarter. As you can see, he's using a lot of low mana cards now. He put in Dubious Hags, Lawless Herd, and Summon Militia, along with Gifted Recruits, to kind of pad his deck. And then a really interesting choice in playing a level 5 Confinement. I only have it level 1 here, but in game it was level 5. So it's an okay card. I don't really know what the purpose of it is. But then you'll also see that he runs every single dragon once again available to Shadowfen. So it's a decent deck. I'd say that getting off a dragon combo is pretty similar to trying to get off a poison combo, in that both of them kind of require having multiple cards in your hand, which can be unreliable. And since I don't think that Shadowfen is very top tier at the high level right now, it's hard to gauge the strength of this deck. I do play 2 games against Oliver with this though, so you'll have a nice picture of the feel of it. Let's get to it. So this start is looking immediately a lot better for Oliver. He's playing Gifted Recruits first of all, which is a great change that he made. And then he played Spare Dragonlings right behind his Gifted Recruits to try to protect it. I'd say that if you are playing dragons, this is a very smart play to make. Not to talk too much about gameplay though, if I were to play in Oliver's position, I would have put the Gifted Recruits in front of the green prototypes so that it would be harder to kill the Gifted Recruits and thus the Spare Dragonlings in the next turn. So over here, Oliver gets off the first half of the feared Spare Dragonlings into Wandering Worms combo. He is able to land a Wandering Worms and then deal 5 damage off of it, so that's a 4 mana 11 strength swing, which is pretty good. If he's able to get off the Spare Dragonlings too, then it would have actually been a good combo, but unfortunately, it's very, very easy for me to kill off the Wandering Worms and then the Spare Dragonlings immediately. So if you look at the total, it's actually 6 mana for 12 strength, which is pretty average. In fact, that's a lot worse than Gifted Recruits, and that's a lot worse than, for example, Lich Summoners, which would have been 6 mana for 15 or 18 strength, depending on the level. So Oliver tries to race me here with his dragon deck, which in a traditional Shadowfen rush deck would be a viable strategy. But the problem with his dragon deck is that he has no way to close out the game. He doesn't have any 2 movement units, in fact. He doesn't have his first Mutineer, which should be in pretty much every single deck. He doesn't have Warfront Runners, and he doesn't have, say, Salty Outcast. So even if he's able to get in some base damage on me, he's not going to be able to close out the game. I didn't know this for sure until I went back and looked through his whole deck list, but being forced to include all of the dragons in your deck gives you very little room to add in strategies that you need for pretty much every deck. So he's not able to close out the game over here, and in fact, he doesn't even run the Toxic Sacrifice here that's needed to clear out his baseline. So that was a quick game 1. Let me show you guys a game 2 that was a lot longer and a lot closer of a game. So I play nothing on my turn 1, and Oliver starts off with immediately a 12 to 13 strength lead. Oh, and look at that. So I missed my first 2 turns. In a traditional game, this would have been game over already by far, but we'll see how it goes. So over here, I do respect the dragon strategy enough that I decide to play my Ubis to kill his dragons, because having a dragon on the board does actually open you up to a lot better of a turn. For example, you can play spare dragonlings to immediately buff it, or you can play wandering worms. I don't think dragons are a good strategy, but I do respect that they can be very strong if played in the correct situation. So once again, Oliver is able to get off his wandering worms and spare dragonling combo, but also, once again, he only gets off half of it. This part is a misplay on his part. He should have actually played the spare dragonlings in front of my Ubis the Hunter, just so that he could guarantee that it dies first. And then that would have actually made a super solid play, even though it would put a little bit less pressure on my base. So he's firing off his Wandering Worms pretty consistently, which is pretty good, and it's definitely proving to be a pretty strong card. Here, Oliver had a huge board advantage at the beginning because I missed 2 whole turns of the game, but he's still having trouble finishing the game off. Like, he's able to play his dragons, but they're not consistent enough. For example, that Dangerous Suitors was a very average 5 mana 10 strength play, so he's still having trouble closing out the game. So a decently obvious play here would be to play Siren of the Seas, but instead of that, it's a little bit disrespectful in that I'm pretty sure that Oliver can't wipe me out, so I decide that I'm just going to race his base. Like, what is he going to do about it? At this point, I'm assuming that he's playing a very similar deck to the first Shadowfen game, and I know that he has no 2 movement units, and he has very little base defense. So if I'm going to play aggressive, there isn't much that he can do about it. I actually expect the Broodmother Cordia over here, and as we'll see, that's exactly what he plays. So Cordia showing off a little bit of her defensive plays here. I think that she's actually a pretty good card, and as you can see, there aren't very many other cards that Oliver could have played where I wouldn't be able to kill him with Ulf the Hammer, but here we do have a situation where Ulf the Hammer has no way of killing his base this turn. So maybe this game said a little bit about including both Summon Militia and Lawless Herd in your deck, because Oliver really did lose because he didn't have any mobile units to wipe out that 1 strength unit at the end. But as you can see, the dragons really aren't strong enough to be viable at rank 1 games. Now, if Oliver's deck over here was completely maxed out or mostly level 4 to level 5 cards, he might have won that last game because I low rolled at the beginning so hard. But as you can see, being able to play consistently powerful cards like Ubis the Hunter, or even just your standard gifted recruits and Lich Summoners, it really gives you a huge edge over the opponent when the opponent is playing cards that are more luck-oriented or situational cards like Dangerous Suitors or Spare Dragonlings. Especially when playing control decks, over time the amount of luck averages out, and I think that the strength of the dragons averages out to a lower power level than the standard cards that most people play today. So that's all for now, guys. In the next couple of videos, I'll definitely be showing off some highlights from my rank up videos. Most of them are against bots, but that's whatever. Let me know what you guys think, and peace out.